and welcome to the February series of Aircover. Aircover is an international, informative, and inspiring webinar series by global university systems that brings to you some of the most interesting businesses and business leaders from across the globe. Our topic today is breaking into the music industry. We're joined by MJ Salisbury, who's the director of Live Here Now. Live Here Now is a bespoke record label which has recorded over 1,000 gigs worldwide. The label has toured the world with Depeche Mode, has been to Japan with Underworld, and across the UK and Europe with many bands, including the Pixies, Nick Cave, Bring Me the Horizon, Robbie Williams, and Erasure. Today, we'll be discussing the importance of networking, adapting to market changes, and overcoming challenges in your field. MJ will be talking about his experience in the industry and give you some top advice on how to forge your career, your dream career. MJ, thank you for joining us today and for taking the time to speak to our staff and students. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, Jackson. Thank you.
So good to have you here. MJ, just before we start, Gus places a lot of importance on his company values, and I would like to tease out one of those values and hear what your thoughts are on collaboration. What does collaboration mean to Live Here Now?
Collaboration is really the essence of how our business works. We work with an artist as a joint venture, and then we sorry, there's something in the background.
It's stopped now. Stop now.
Yeah. So with collaboration, our business model is built on working with artists, with labels, with managers. So it's a joint venture. So without collaboration, we don't actually have a business model. The benefits of collaborating with someone is that you get their insight, their input, their knowledge into a project. Equally, we put ours, and it should be more successful.
Thank you, MJ. To our viewers, do send questions for MJ in the chat box, and we'll come back to you during the Q&A session. MJ, let's dive straight in. Having spent 30 years working in the music industry, you must have seen it all. You have worked with some of the biggest names. You have worked for some of the most famous record labels, Depeche Mode, Abbey Road Studios, and give us some insight into the industry and your personal journey throughout your career.
I started with music was a hobby for me. I started doing music at school, and I always loved just listening to music. You know, it was a big part of my life as a kid. When I left school, I was at a gig. I joined a band. I had no intention of really joining a band. You know, I'd sort of played with mates, but I joined a band. It was great fun. Then I went to university. When I was at university, I started recording with this band, and then I started sort of hanging out in studios, making cups of tea, just getting to know the engineers, and I was fascinated by the life of it. So after the degree finished, I thought I was going to do something else in my life. I had a complete change of heart, and thought music is the way forward. So I had to take some time off to get some funds. So of all the jobs, I worked in a dairy down in Sussex, and then I went to the Gateway School of Music and did a postgraduate course in music production, recording, and business studies, which I loved. And after that, I became a motorcycle courier because, again, it was hard finding work. I needed to keep the income going. And eventually I got a job at Mute Records, managing their studio. And from Mute, the journey went to EMI, to Abbey Road Studios, to Universal Records. And then we separated and we set up Live Here Now as an independent label and production company. So it's sort of been one long sort of snaking sort of journey really for me.
What an amazing journey. Whenever I hear Abbey Road Studios, the Beatles come to my mind. The show for many people. Can you tell us a bit more about your time at Abbey Road Studios?
Abbey Road Studios, if you work in recorded music, and you know, it's the best place to work. The people there were so lovely. Everyone thinks they're sort of like people in sort of like white lab coats and this sort of thing. It's a fantastic place. Obviously, you know, some of the best recording engineers going there, but we had guys who would just look after microphones, and you know, if you could go and talk to the classical guys about how they would record something. There was a really good fraternity. it was brilliant. I have to say, you know, the 5 years that we were there was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, a lot of famous people come in, and for me, it's not just the fame; it's the talent of people. You know, so it's brilliant.
Now, as the director of a global live record label and production company, what kind of skills do you attribute to your success? And are these skills transferable across the industry? If someone want to follow your footsteps,
Yeah.
what would they do? What should they do?
Um,
Or how could they follow your footsteps?
I think I think everybody needs to carve out their own footsteps because every journey is different. But I think there are sort of skills and values that are important. I think the first one is never be afraid of hard work. I think work. I love my work, so that's a great thing for me. But you know, sometimes it's long hours. Sometimes you might work with someone who isn't particularly grateful. You know, don't be afraid of that. Just embrace it. The values that I learned when I was at Mute Records, the head of Mute, Daniel Miller, was sort of like he's still a friend, but he was sort of like a mentor for me. We set up Live Here Now as part of Mute Records. Um, and I think Mute's philosophy was always be honest and be fair in business. And I think Life and Now have sort of taken that. Um, it's very easy to try and get one over on someone, but if you work in collaboration, that's not the way you're going to last. You know, our business has been going since 2004, 2005. And so even though we were owned by Mute, EMI, and Universal, we've managed to keep that going. Whereas a lot of people who sort of have done similar things haven't lasted that. I think, particularly in music or any creative industry, embrace change and adapt to it. That could be the technology that you record with, it could be social media to market it, it could be networking, it could be anything, but don't be afraid of it. You know, I learn from young people who've got work experience because they'll show me something on Instagram that is a feature or something like this, and it's like, wow, I didn't know you could do that. You know, so learn from that, and say no if if an opportunity is not right. Don't be afraid to say no. Be respectful, but say no. And I think all these skills are life skills for people. I think, you know, take them into other areas.
Oh, absolutely. Now, saying no respectfully can be challenging at times.
Yeah,
What would you advise to somebody who struggles with it? Like, is there anything they could do to overcome this?
I think it's like anything. I think communication is probably the hardest part of any job. Um, Anyone can learn the technical things. There are people who are obviously much more sort of have a natural ability to technical side and engineering, and these people are much more talented than I am in that sort of genre. But for me, I think if you're tactful, and I think if you're honest and you explain where you're coming from, and if I think, and then it's just experience. Don't be afraid to say no. But you know, it's like anything. You don't have to be confrontational to say no. You just have to explain your reasons, and don't burn your bridges.
Many students who are following this webinar might be thinking of starting in the music industry. How did it all start for you, and what advice would you give yourself if you were starting out in the industry today?
I think for me, the main thing for me was when I went to Gateway School of Music. I had the most inspirational sort of tutors there. One's a very good friend. I'm in touch with another one through business. In fact, one became my lawyer when I got signed to Mute Records. And for me, it was just an opportunity to really learn about music, about creating music, about things like publishing, things like rights. You know, it's a little bit of a minefield, but it was really the start of the journey for me. From that, I took a lot of work experience. You know, I'd put my hand up if anybody had any opportunity to do any work experience. I didn't care what I did. I just wanted to learn and learn and learn, and I sort of became a sponge. And funny enough, sort of 5 years later, or 3 years later, when I had my interview at Muse, one of the reasons I think I got the job was because I'd had so much experience trying different things. And also on my CV, it showed that I wasn't just sitting at home watching telly or playing PlayStation. I was actually out there trying to do things. And I think that's really important for people. I think, just take any experience you can get, um, even if you don't think, well, it's not quite right for me, because you might be shocked, but also you might learn something from it.
Absolutely. Now, you've been in the industry for 30 years, so much experience, and also bring all the experience you had during the years where you were studying. We would like to know, how has the music industry changed in the last 30 years? And how was it for you to adapt to these changes?
I mean, I'm surprised and I'm shocked how things have changed. Not necessarily in a bad way, but if you'd asked me, 25, 30 years ago, it was so different. I think the biggest change was the advent of digital music. From recording, people didn't need massive machines with tape. It was within sort of like the first sort of recording devices were Cubase and the first very sort of versions of Pro Tools and this sort of thing. And then suddenly, it was probably within sort of 4 or 5 years that you could buy something on a laptop, so people could start to make music at home. They didn't have to go to a recording studio. It allowed people who might have creativity in them, but didn't play a traditional instrument, to actually program, to sample, and all that sort of thing. So, I think that's massive. Obviously, the other side of that is that people didn't need big recording studios. So someone as famous as Billie Eilish recorded her, #1 album with her brother in their bedroom.
Yeah.
And the production value is amazing because you've got two incredibly creative people who went off and did that. For me, in live recording, there's a massive change. The trucks that we used to see at gigs were massive, sort of big articulated lorries. Now you can get them in a van or a 7.5 tonner because all the equipment shrunk. And it's much, much more powerful. Changing music consumption. So originally it was vinyl, CD. You would listen to radios. DJs maybe had a little bit more influence on what they could play. Now everything's very playlisted. Vinyl is very trendy now, but obviously most music is saturated by, not even download, by streaming. So that's how most music gets heard. So yeah, I mean, I think those are the biggest changes. And adapting was basically, I mean, our core values that we talked about were the same, but just allow yourself to be open to new avenues. With Live Here Now, our sort of like our business philosophy is high quality deluxe releases. So we make stuff that is very, very sort of bespoke to the core fan base.
Yeah.
Not what you'd probably see, not that they sell CDs in supermarkets a lot anymore, but that sort of thing. So it's more to do with that. And we've just had to adapt.
What advice would you give to students who are concerned about not being strong enough to adapt quickly enough to these ongoing changes? I mean, you have experienced this firsthand. What advice would you give them?
I think people nowadays are more adaptive than people of maybe when I was entering the work. I've got 2 kids, and my 11-year-old is making music with GarageBand. My 8-year-old came in the other day, and we got out a native instrument session, and we started doing some programming, making some noises. I go and make a cup of tea or something. I come back, and they just leave them to it, and they just press buttons and they create stuff. So I think people of a generation who might be at university now need to just maybe believe that they probably do have the ability to adapt. Because for me, when I went to university, when I started university, there were no mobile phones. So nowadays, it's not even a phone. A watch has more power than, the first computers that I used and this sort of thing. So I think they need to just understand that they probably do have it within them. I think the way that they've learned, they've had to come and, they're educating themselves on the tail end of a pandemic. So they've had to adapt to that, so there's a load of things that they would just have understood, and they've just got to realize that they probably have got those.
Yeah. You've mentioned how music consumption has changed from vinyl to CD to download to streaming. I know my parents still love their vinyls. I've still got cassettes in my attic from years ago. Is there any sort of medium that you are personally fond of, which is not there anymore?
I strangely enough, I love the fact that I can be walking the dog or in the car, and someone can phone me up, and it could be like my nephew, it could be one of my friends, one of my peers, and say, "Have you heard such and such?" And I'm not going to say, "Hey, whatever," but on Apple Music or Spotify or something like this, I can just instantly listen to stuff. So I love the fact that digital music and streaming opens up an avenue for people. I think music should be there for everyone. It's not elitist. It's there, and I think I'm actually really excited by that. The other side is I love beautiful vinyl. We make very heavyweight vinyl that is often coloured with big gatefolds. We make beautiful books. This is this sort of thing. Sort of photo books, and the CDs and the discs go in here. So it's the combination for me of having something that is almost throwaway like streaming, but something that is really tangible and high quality, which you can sort of like listen to on. And I think there's a lot of fun still putting a needle on a record.
Absolutely.
And like you said, you've got your cassettes. Bands releasing stuff on cassettes. I don't know how many people have a cassette player. They sit on people's shelves now.
I know, yes. That's so true. After such an impressive career in the music industry, there must have been some highs and lows. What tips could you give to people who want to follow your career footsteps? We're talking about the footsteps again. You've mentioned earlier that everybody has their own footsteps, but literally taking you as an inspiration and getting your advice on how it has been for you to have those highs and lows.
I think my advice is I learn from everyone. So when I was at Mute Records, I worked with some of the best producers in the world. I managed the studios, and we had some of the most creative artists in the world come through. And because Mute was a very friendly environment, and people of very different genres, sort of a lot of the drum and bass boys would use our studio. Goldie did a lot of sessions there, and a lot of these people, you would just take something from them, and that value might be just how they talk to someone else, or it might be something like really creative. And I think that's really important. I think always take something. But the other side is, if you have a bad experience with someone, take that bad experience and turn that into positive. So you think, actually, I don't want to do that again. And we've had clients who we've worked with in the past, and for whatever reason, the journey, the experience hasn't been particularly satisfying. And so we've avoided that in the future, because either you take too much time sort of dealing with problems and dealing with issues, and then maybe another project suffers because of that.
Yes.
So and that really is experience. So I think what your students will learn is simply, they've got 3 assignments to do. Work out the order to do your assignments. That's the starting point. It's as simple as that. Do I go out? Do I pull an all-nighter? It's that simple. If you learn your values, then you can take that with you.
It's making the right choices.
Of course it is.
You've mentioned working together with so many amazing artists. Which artist was the most fun to work with? mean, I'm sure they've all been incredible to work with, but there must have been the one or the other which has had a memorable impact on you, or the most fun.
The most memorable was I. Most memorable was we booked the studio with a guy called Reeves Gabrel, who's now the guitarist with The Cure, and a guy called Darren Belmonte was sort of a production manager, and he said, "Oh, can we have the studio for 4 days? I've got a guy who's been doing some stuff at Glastonbury, and he just wants to get together with some English friends and just put some stuff down." So we booked the studio out, and I was actually I'd had an injury playing football, so I was having a checkup on my eyes at the hospital, and I phoned up to say I'm leaving now, and the receptionist said, "You didn't tell me that David Bowie was coming in the studio." And I said, "Well, don't be silly, David Bowie's not coming in the studio." And she said, "Do you not think I know who David Bowie is?" And I walked in the studio, and funny enough, there was David Bowie, and it's quite weird because he was sitting in the back, sort of strumming guitar, sort of singing, and I would say hello to everybody in the studio because that's what you do when you're a studio manager. But it's a bit weird when David Bowie sat there, and I went up and said, "Hi, I'm MJ," and he said, "Hi, man, I'm David Bowie," and I said, "Yeah, I kind of guessed that." And he was absolutely fantastic, and we had a brilliant session with him, with Reeves, and they were doing a lot of writing, and Reeves just came in one day and he said, "Oh, David's been listening to some of the stuff you've been playing bass on." And I used to play bass through a dirty filter. I used to work with a guy called James Dunbar, who has Mutronics, which were like a filter company. And James was brilliant. He would sort of make me all these little tricks. And he said, "Would you, David wants you to play bass on a track?" And I thought, "No." And I said, I can't do this. And he said, "Look, do it." And he said he won't be there. He'll just tell you what he wants and then go home. And I said, "Okay." So we went in the studio. David told me what he wanted, and he sat there the whole evening. And it was just probably the best evening of my life, jamming with David Bowie. And yeah, so it was fantastic.
It's amazing. Thank you for sharing that amazing story. I mean, it's been, not everybody can say that they've experienced this, so it's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's brilliant to hear. Now, there's something that our audience don't know. You have studied philosophy before transitioning to the music industry.
I did.
And some of our students might be having the same thoughts to have a career change.
Mm-hmm.
How can they move into your industry? What would be your advice?
Well, I actually went to university because and I had a complete career change. I entered university convinced I was going to be a soldier. I was going to join the army. And I decided with my careers officer to just take 3 years to do a degree. I'd spent a lot of time with the army before then, just training and training and training. And this was sort of like a period where I could go off and just be a student for 3 years. And that's really when sort of the reins fell off and I really got involved with music. But I got to the second year of my philosophy degree, and I chose philosophy because, shamefully, I didn't want to work very hard. And that's not saying that philosophy students don't work hard, but what I mean is I didn't want to do something traditional. I wanted to do something different. And the great thing about my degree was I could understand ideas behind politics, behind, pure philosophy, behind art. It was a very creative. It was, it was the history of ideas towards these things. And I got to the second year and I realized that the army wasn't what I wanted to do. I got to the point where I wasn't prepared to kill anyone, so that kind of put an end to that. And I love doing music, and I'd always loved doing music, and so I finished my degree because I felt that I wanted to, have something to fall back on should it not work out. But I'd already started planning what I wanted to do, and I found the Gateway School of Music. It just took a long time. It took about 2 years to get there because, at the time, my council wouldn't fund me. So I had to go and save money to help with the fees and this sort of thing. So I think whatever you're doing doesn't really matter. I've had people who have worked for me on work experience and people I come across who have done all sorts of degrees, And that's artists as well. Queen were at university. I think one of Queen was going to be a dentist. Don Broco went to Nottingham University. You know, so there's lots of bands who do different things, as well as people behind the scenes. So if you're doing a certain degree, either think, well, am I in a position where maybe I can change to something that is more vocational? That's one option. Or decide that, do you know what? I'm going to finish my degree because it's my fallback, and then I'm going to just get some work experience on, just see what happens. When I interview people, I don't necessarily look at what the degree's in. I look at what they did when they were a student, you know,
Yeah.
and which is what we were talking about.
It's great to hear about your time from when you were a student. We'll move on to talk about how it was like when you started becoming an artist. But before that, to our viewers, do send questions for MJ. Don't be shy. Don't hold back. You can already start sending your questions now, because we'll start collecting them so that we have them ready for the Q&A session. So do start already sending questions, and we look forward to them. So we already heard about your time as a student, MJ, and we would now like to hear about how it was for you, like, to be an artist, your time as an artist. What was the transition like from being in front of the camera to behind the camera? And if others want, yes.
You go. No, finish.
And if others, like if our students want to do the same transition in the music industry, they would like to know how you did it. So it'd be good to hear.
I think it's being in a band, I think, is a bit like a pyramid. There are lots of people who sort of like jam and do stuff, and that's how I started. I just, you know, once I sort of realised I wanted to do music, I was playing bass. I played trumpet previously. I picked up the trumpet again. I could play piano, so I started getting into synthesizers and this sort of thing, and keyboards, and I started playing with different bands, and then found a couple of guys I was really comfortable with. We started making musics, and it was literally an old school thing. We recorded a demo, and we sent that out, and a small label in Bristol, an independent label called Cup of Tea Records, they heard it, and they phoned us up and said, "We love this. We'd like to talk to you." We also went into EMI Records. We spoke to someone at EMI who sort of had a very sort of different approach to things. And so we started recording with a cup of tea. It just seemed, you know, it just seemed natural. We just wanted to sort of make music. It was as a genre, it was sort of like a beats type thing. It fitted with the label, and it was brilliant. And then we finished a single, and then two other labels were interested in us, Mute Records and Skink Records, and we signed to Mute, so we did the album with them. We did the publishing with Mute. Publishing is very important if you're an artist as well, because that's how you collect your royalties. And we just carried on, you know, working. I was actually working at Mute at the same time, but I'd wanted to start my own music career as an artist outside of Mute, because I didn't just want to sign to, you know, the label I worked at. So it was a strange decision, but I think our trouble was that you get to the point where, you know, if you've got to pay for a mortgage, you know, and you're a poor musician and you don't make money, you have to make a decision on what you do. So it sort of fizzled out. There wasn't some big sort of heavy split for artistic differences or anything like that. It's just I stayed working at Mute. Another guy is a very successful photographer. Another guy is very successful. He worked in marketing and advertising. So we all stayed in sort of creative industries. Yeah. And funny enough, we all do little bits of music ourselves. I still do music. It's more, I've sort of gone back to my sort of techno beginnings, and you know, and I will eventually self-release that, you know, just for a personal thing, really. Yeah. Adapting to the other side was always very easy, because I never really had a problem with it. You know, for me, I guess I didn't manage the band, but I would sort a lot of the things out. So part of that is because I worked for a label, so I understood some of it, and I think people just migrate to doing certain skill sets that they sort of feel comfortable with. Um, so it was quite easy in the end, really.
You mentioned adapting. How, like, sorry, I'm just getting all these questions coming through right now. So you mentioned adapting. So how was it? How did you find it? How have you continued to adapt to the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic? And what advice would you give to students who haven't been able to pursue their dreams during the restrictions of the pandemic, just based on adaptability? Because you mentioned adapting was one of the key elements in your career.
Well, we were lucky because as Live Here Now are both a label and a production company. So we go to gigs, we record them, but also we release them. So our web shop, predominantly, we did a massive sale. We reignited, we marketed our web shop in a way that we'd never done before, and that was very successful. I think during the pandemic, people wanted a connection with bands they were in, so it worked quite well. And the other thing is that we went back to live streaming because we'd live streamed Deadmau5 in 2009 at the Roundhouse to Nokia phones, just as a Nokia phoned us up and said, "We need someone to stream something. Can you do it?" And we went, "Yeah, give us what you need." And we worked with them. That was just a test for Nokia. 2 years before the pandemic, we Soft Cell's last ever show at the O2. We live streamed to over 250 cinemas around the world while the concert was actually happening. So live streaming was something we'd done, but as a business wasn't working. So we have a very good relationship with a lot of promotion companies, and AEG were one of them. So we sat down and we worked out how we could work using one of the venues that they have, which is Indigo at the O2, and we did some live streaming. And so again, we're back to adapting. I don't know about advice for COVID. I mean, I hope that the pandemic will sort of peter out, because it's a shock for everyone, and obviously your students have had a pause, a full start, or trouble. They've got to get back into their own lives and working and studying. So I just think just try and stay focused.
Thank you, MJ. We're slowly coming to an end to this session, but we'll move on to the Q&As. We have got a couple of good questions that have come through. Let's start with the first one. How essential is it to know how to play an instrument while working with other musicians?
You don't need to play an instrument nowadays. You can be good at programming on a computer. So if you've got something up here, you can get the computer. You can use the computer to create, not just the drum beat, but the lead line, the orchestra. I think you probably have to have an understanding of creativity in it, but you can use technology to that. Obviously, if you are a musician, then that's a great thing to help you, because you understand, whether it's the theory of music or how tunes get put together, But there are some bands that make, songs out of 3 or 4 different keys, which is, more of an art thing rather than a pop thing, should we say.
The next question is, did you have any formal training for the instruments you play via lessons or tutors?
Yes. I had when I was about 10 years old, I'd started playing the piano at primary school, sort of 6, 7 years old, and I got a little bit bored of it. So they said, go and find another instrument. And I tried the flute, the violin. The violin teacher just said, "You're so bad, I can't teach you." And I walked in, and literally my last throw was the trumpet. And I had this really inspirational teacher, and he was all about getting kids to play sort of like not just brass bands, but swing bands and, sort of jazz, and even at the age of 12, 13, sort of this sort of music as well as classical music. So yes, I did have formal training.
That answers the question. And the next one is, do you have some resources students can use to teach themselves about the legal side of things, or did you learn it on the go?
I learned at Gateway School of Music. I think the legal side of things is a very good question, by the way. It's it's difficult because if you want to work in the music industry, you must understand what publishing is, what recording rights are, because this is what protects you. You can be the best musician in the world, but if you're not actually getting someone to collect money on your behalf, whether you're a session musician or whether you're a writer, you're probably going to be the poorest musician in the world as well. So I would say just Google it. Just, there are courses that you can do. There are tutorials that you can do. There are a lot of people on YouTube now, which will help as well. So I would definitely look into that side of things if you want a career in the music industry.
Our next question is, do you think there's enough recognition for people behind the scenes, like those in production in the music industry?
Do you know what? I think it's down to the bands, because I think, the creative person, so some of the people behind the scenes are just as important as the people on the front. And that could be the music producer working with a band. Andy Weatherall, look what he did to Primal Scream. He took an indie band, and Screamadelica, I think, is one of the most amazing. It will stand the test of time. If you've never listened to Screamadelica by Primal Scream, put it on and listen to the album they did before that. I can't tell you the name of the album before, but Screamadelica, it was amazing. And I think, there are some people who just really, and that might be sort of like a manager who helps nurture a band as well. So I think it's an equilibrium, because, again, Ed Sheeran used to busk. I mean, that's not just publicity or someone's running that as a good market. He used to be a busker, but someone made Ed Sheeran, from a busker into one of the most successful artists in the world.
And a final question, can you give us insight into the experience of touring the world?
A lot of jet lag. Don't be late for your hotel lobby call, because the bus or the tour plane, everything goes. It doesn't wait for you. Certainly if you're not the lead artist. Touring is very different now. Obviously, Brexit for a start has meant that Europe is not accessible in the way that it was 3 years ago. And the pandemic's obviously caused a problem with that, because people aren't touring around Europe. So we've got the combination of people coming to the UK, but then not going into Europe, or vice versa as well. So that's something that will open up, as hopefully, and I think it will hopefully open up quite quickly. But it's something that needs to be addressed by the industry, and governments need to help us, because live music is such a massive industry within the music industry itself, because it employs so many people, not just the sound engineers, but the person who goes and makes the coffee, and the person who makes your festival noodles and this sort of thing, and the security teams, the medics. There's so many people who work in this, so that we need to keep that going. For me, it was just the most amazing opportunity to sort of go to so many countries, watch that, and experience live music. I still get a buzz from watching bands, and it doesn't just have to be bands that I'm not my personal favorite bands. I can still take something from working with the band, because either the fans are just so amazing, or the band works so hard, and their connection with the band. And so I'm always feeling that I'm learning something. So, traveling around the world and doing that was just an eye opener for me.
MJ, thank you so much. What a great way to end this webinar. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Jackson.
Thank you, MJ. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us today. We hope you have enjoyed learning more about breaking into the music industry. Our next webinar is on the 30th of March at 3 p.m. GMT with Sophie Southmaid, owner and creative director of Social Southmaid. It's a London-based digital agency. Now, if you wondered how to fine-tune your social media, this is a webinar that you do not want to miss. And on top of that, this webinar will also be part of celebrating International Women's Day. So to get to know more about delving into the social media management, do join us on the 30th of March at 3 p.m. For more information, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we'll see you in March. Goodbye.